I'm Meg Turner, and I'm the principal at Owen High School. Through the Kiwanis Club of the Swannanoa Valley, we have funding to help Kriya do some presentations for our Owen families. When COVID entered and doing things in person went down, Kriya decided to take on the challenge of doing a Zoom presentation. What I just want you to know real quickly, other than Owen High School is hosting a meeting, that I personally have been a fan of Kriya's now for about 3 or 4 years. My husband and I attended an evening workshop, I guess on behalf of our daughter and also just my schoolwork as the principal. I thought you can't know enough stuff about drugs and alcohol. So I became a Kriya fan, and she has become a really great partner and an important partner with the Buncombe County Schools. She's presented to all 42 of the Buncombe County principals. She's presented to the Buncombe County School Advisory Council. She's also done some work with just specific to Owen. She did some parent presentations in the fall in person. So we're real proud of our connection with Kriya because we think she has a lot of really important information to share with you all. So without any further comedy, I'm going to turn it over to Kriya and just say I really appreciate you all being here tonight, and hopefully it'll be as helpful to you as it has been and will continue to be to me as I try to raise my 14-year-old. Thanks. Enjoy the session.
So welcome, everybody. I am excited that you are here, that you are back. Welcome to Not My Kid, Part 2. Tonight we're going to be talking about how to addiction-proof our kids. And so this is my very, very favorite thing to teach about, because while the drug ed stuff last week, not that I don't enjoy teaching it, but it stresses me out and scares me every time I teach it, to be honest. So I love talking about this part of things, where this is about you being empowered as parents with tools and a skill set to really help your kids be resilient and resistant through the growing number of risky and potentially destructive stuff that's out there, and starting as young as possible. So I'm excited to do this with you all. So my name again is Kriya Lencion, and I have been a school counselor for over 16 years. I've worked with fifth graders through college students. I've been a private therapist with adolescents and their families, and an addiction specialist. This is kind of my jam, that I have worked with in treatment centers with adolescents and with adults, and then done a lot of focus on prevention in the last several years, which means I work with educators and school systems and parents, doing trainings on how to help our kids be addiction resistant and how to create systems and create families that really help to addiction proof our kids. I am authoring a book called Raising an Addiction-Proof Kid in an Addictive World. I'm so passionate about this very topic. And I'm a mom. I'm a mom to a 21-year-old recent college grad. And he is going to come up in my presentation in a few places for sure, because he has been my practice ground and my greatest teacher on this topic. And now I've got 2 stepkids that are 16 and 17, and I get to do it all over again. So I want to root us in a couple reality check reminders here. What we're talking about tonight is, while I may default to substance language, it really applies to any and all sort of risky and addictive behaviors that our kids can engage in. And we're going to unpack that a little bit more. Keep in mind that I'm going to give you what all of the research says helps us to prevent our kids getting involved in self-destructive stuff, but that it is easier said than done in the reality and the complexity of parenting. So this is going to be a bunch of best case practice information, and please give yourself the grace and the realism that it's impossible to do all of this right. So we need to be choosing our battles. I'm going to give you a bunch of information, and then ultimately you're going to pick what fits you and fits your family and fits your kids. So in my household, so my kiddo had a whole bunch of risk factors that I could check off. He was living with a 100% single mom, no father in his life, multiple learning disabilities and challenges, double addict genes, a racial minority in a racial majority world. And so I knew that with my kid, the substance use issue was a life or death one. That was the battle that I was willing to fight, and the hill I was willing to die on. So I made a lot of sacrifices and oriented a lot of my parenting around the substance abuse prevention piece, which means that I chose to, instead of taking us out of poverty, to not get that second job so that I could be present, to be there after school and be there when he came in the door after being out. and had an eye to eye with him. Probably sacrifice some dating, sacrifice some social world. Not what I recommend for everybody, but that's what I needed to do for my kiddo. So all of this information, again, is guaranteed to reduce risk, but it is not guaranteed to prevent. So again, we're being realistic about this, is that you can do all of the things right. You can apply every single thing that I tell you to do, read all the books, listen to all the podcasts, and your kid still goes out and uses. That's just because they're curious, and the culture that we are swimming upstream with is so strong, which we're going to talk about. And just their brains are underdeveloped and lead them to make really stupid decisions, which we're also going to talk about. So then it becomes a skill set, which you're also going to talk about, which is about responding in a way that's artful, that helps you all be stronger and wiser because of it, and rebound, versus it becoming the beginning of a really tough road. The good news is that research tells us that kids who have this conversation with their parents, that have two-way conversations about the risks of drugs and alcohol, are way less likely to use. There's a study that I mentioned last week that 12 to 17-year-olds and the kids that had had just one conversation with their parents in the last year about the risks of substances were using 80% less. The downside being that only 30% of those parents were having those conversations, but you're the ones that are gonna, because you're here. So I want to give you a couple caveats before we move any further. I'm going to let you just look at my kiddo for a minute. Because I'm moving fast, I don't have time to candy coat. I don't have time to beat around the bush. So I can get a little direct and get a little intense about this, but just put the helmets on, strap in, because we're going to roll. Okay, we are going to start with some scary stuff first. So I'll give you the warning on that. I know I promised you hope and feel good stuff, but before we get to the empowerment and the tools, that I'm going to kind of set the stage for, just so we can be realistic about what it is that our kids are facing and dealing with on a daily basis. We got to know what our enemy is, right, in order to beat it. So this is my kiddo. This is Kai. Just graduated from college, 21. And he's like a great case study. So I'm going to bring him up several points along the way. So I want to root down in the main intentions of this conversation between last presentation and this one, is that what we're aiming for here is that our kids aren't going to use not just substances, but anything in a way that will hurt themselves or somebody else. And in the worst case, create tragedies or death. And we also don't want them to develop problem use or addiction that creates destruction on their lives, right? On their health, on their relationships, on their mental health, on their careers and their finances. And so we're trying to establish inner compasses in our kids and trying to strengthen their resilience and their resistance. So let's get clear on this term addiction. Just get some common language around it, because this word gets thrown around all over the place, that people will say, oh my God, I'm so addicted to shoes. I'm so addicted to sushi or Netflix. Can some of those be addictions? Sure, but let's break down what that really means, so that we know how to spot a problem, or when to call it a bona fide addiction in our kids. So the main foundation of addiction is this, that a kid is engaging in something where they are putting themselves at risk, where they're experiencing problems and consequences, but continuing to do it anyway. You have to have this criteria in order to call something an addiction. And then there's a bunch of other criteria that can pile on it. So one of them is loss of control. This means that your kid who they're like, I've got to do my homework, I've got to do my chores, I'm only going to game for an hour, right? And my parents have set this rule that I can only do an hour at a time. So then I got in trouble last time. So I'm only going to do an hour, and they get plugged in, and 2 hours, 3 hours go by every single time. So loss of control means an inability to set and keep limits on a behavior. The next one is becoming center of life. When something becomes the center of your life, that means that it is taking up more energy, time, headspace, emotional space than their other values and their other priorities and responsibilities. Just to draw a line, that doesn't mean that the kid that is really into soccer and they're a soccer champ and their social world is about soccer and they watch soccer all the time, that it is an addiction. Because remember, in order to be an addiction, it would have to be creating problems for them that they are ignoring and continuing anyway. So the fourth C is needing that thing to cope. So whether it's a behavior or it's a substance, it is the tool that they have in their toolbox to bring them belonging, confidence, fun or handling life stressors and uncomfortable feelings. And then the fifth C is craving. So, and this has a brain basis to it, which we're going to talk about, meaning that they're kind of thinking about it and dreaming about it and missing it when they don't have it. So the other two things, I couldn't find C's to go with it. I'll give you extra bonus points if you can think of one. But one is tolerance. So that means that whatever the substance is, whatever the behavior is, has to get amped up and amped up and amped up in order to be popping off the same feel-good chemicals. So if that's video games, they have to get faster and bigger and more violent and graphic. If it's porn, it has to be faster and more graphic and more hardcore. And then there's withdrawal, and that can be physical when it comes to a drug, right, that the body goes out of balance, or psychological if you take your kid's phone, for example, and they have a tantrum, they treat you horribly, they feel anxious, they are lost and wandering around. That is a problem. So let's talk about the sea that they're swimming in and kind of some of these things that are pushing and pulling on them that can be detrimental. So we've got some new things, some old things that are becoming amped up. So eating disorders are not new, but unfortunately they are becoming more common in boys and in kids of color than they used to be. And the fact that our kids are swimming in social media like never before, that is feeding them images of what the perfect body is supposed to be, more than the bulletin boards and the advertisements and stuff that I grew up with even, is that seems to be feeding those even worse. Self-harm is a newer thing to be as popular as it is. So unfortunately, by 8th grade, up to 20% of any class has engaged in self-harm. And that's often cutting, or it can be some other forms of hurting oneself. But that has become a more common way of coping with overwhelm and just overwhelming feelings, distress. So porn, the median age average of porn exposure is now 11 and creeping downward. That's the average age. So a lot of it's happening younger. And because kids have 24/7, 365 access to hardcore, free, nonstop porn, it is creating health problems. We have a generation of boys getting younger and younger that have epic amounts of erectile dysfunction. And we're seeing it shape dating relationships and sexual violence and all this stuff. So, and I will give you resources specifically to talk about this because it can be tougher than any other subject out there. Video gaming, treatment centers popping up for elementary kids and beyond that are engaged in video game addiction. Remember that all of these things that are here, anything that pops off feel-good chemicals in the brain and that can be used to create belonging, fun, coping mechanisms for uncomfortable feelings, they can become addictive. Phones and everything that happens on them it pops off brain chemicals. They have shown that when kids get a like on their post or on their little duck face picture, that it pops off their brain chemistry the same way that a hit of cocaine does. And let's talk about the blend with where sexuality can get distorted also, and how that can get addictive, is that sexting and being involved on hookup apps and dating apps and in these sexually charged sexting relationships with older guys. I have intervened in my own cute little charter school with 6th, 7th, and 8th graders doing this over the last few years. So, and there can be a charge to it that can be addictive. So the substances are also getting stronger and more dangerous and easier to conceal, as we unpacked fully last week. Things are just getting hulkified and amped up. Every substance from caffeine to alcohol to cannabis, and the means of getting them in the body are bringing things in more concentrated forms to the brain faster, and they're easier to hide and get under our radar and school radars. And the bottom line rule is the stronger something is and the faster it goes to the brain, the more addictive and impairing it is. And so this rule kind of, again, gaming and porn and social media, it's all being designed to be more and more addictive. So these are just a snapshot of some things that we unpacked last week. Again, we've got caffeine and alcohol that are being packaged and sold in these really super kid-friendly ways. And there's devices that they can vape both nicotine in and its extra strong forms of nicotine, and cannabis in and its extra strong forms of cannabis and THC. And they can look like inhalers or flash drives or be functioning watches or working pens or look like hoodie strings or camels, for water in the backpack, but it's actually a vape. And there's things to sneak and hide. So you can have things that look like a water bottle or can of soda or a hairbrush, and it's actually designed to be a storage component for drugs, or stick them in the back of your phone, and edibles that are really strong. So the bottom line is it's becoming increasingly hard to control this from the outside. So as we're going to be focusing on, it's really important that we are helping them to develop their own decision-making and inner compass. All right, and the kids are being bombarded and brainwashed like no other time in history with pro-use messages. So in my day, and not that long ago, my mom would take my cassette or take my, it was like, you can't have that Prince Dirty Mind album, right? And would just take it away or scramble the MTV. Even when my kid was younger, I could check out his playlist, and it was easier to monitor what he was watching and listening to, and that's getting harder and harder to do. So the advertising, too, for caffeine and nicotine products in particular really aims right for kids, right? The nicotine industry is getting hammered for that right now. They've already made their gabillions and gotten about 1 out of 5 high schoolers addicted to nicotine, though, so it's a little bit late. But they spoke right to the wanting badassery and freedom and independence and, all of the things that are very teen value. And while alcohol ads haven't changed, they're everywhere still. And we just don't notice it, right? Because it's been so normalized, but it is soaking in for them, right? It's soaking in beliefs and values about alcohol every time they see a bulletin board or see it in the grocery store or see these ads for how drinking in the morning is a good idea. Thanks, Coors. So I talk about media as being the new peer pressure. It really is what is influencing them to want to use more than anything. And even when it's peer pressure with actual peers, what I'm hearing is that they are getting their messages from the media around them. And it's really part of the new peer pressure. So memes, anybody who's got a 3rd grade or older should be aware of memes. Their jokes, their language is often about whatever memes have come out. A lot of kids are making memes, and there's a lot of real pro-use memes. These were shown to me by 6th graders, by the way. And so we can laugh at this weed lady meme, right? But to them, it's just normalizing, desensitizing, making a joke out of taking 2 Percocets, because there's which I've seen kill a kid that didn't have a tolerance and when it was strong. And then there are YouTubers and people online that just have video series where they're just, this is Haley 420, who she just smokes weed all day out of various objects and shows you how to even make weed smoking devices out of household objects. And she's cute and has millions of youth followers. And there's a lot of shows on that when the kids are like, oh, I'm just watching YouTube or I'm just watching Netflix or Hulu, that are absolutely substance themed. And so this is It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which I can find hilarious, but for a 6th or 7th grader who are telling me they're watching this and have no context and nobody disassembling this for them, it is absolutely giving them some messages. Music right now, it's not new to have substance lyrics and music, but we are at an unprecedented time where, for one, some of the most popular music has a lot of pro-use messages, and they're not talking about the dangers of substances. They're really romanticizing them, and they're really encouraging them. And a lot of it is in language that we don't even catch. It's like code, and it's slang that a lot of adults don't know. And this stuff isn't on the radio. So I'm going to show you the lyrics to what was the number 3 song in the country 2 years ago. And you may have had your kids hopping around going, Gucci gang, which was catchy. But when you read the lyrics and realize that they were wiring them into their brain and singing along with them, you're going to be a little bit. So in this, and if we had time, we'd play a little game with it to see how many substances you can notice. But there are 7 different drug references just in this clip. Never mind the messages about sexuality and women. And our kids are listening to things that we are not, and we're not aware of what they're taking in. So there's also just sort of a American value right now that happiness is about surface attractiveness, and it's about the amount of stuff you have and the amount of likes you can get, right? Your value and your validity is based upon this external validation, right? And that more is better, more whatever, more money, more sex, more stuff. One of the things that I'm seeing happen. And this is a whole other presentation in and of itself. But not so long ago, we used to get our values, or kids used to get their values, their modeling, their information and guidance and identity kind of vertically, right? From their parents, from their grandparents, right? From their elders. And what's happening is that's shifting to like a horizontal transmission of those things, of the modeling and the values. They're getting them from each other, and they're getting them from media. And since we are not plugged in to a lot of their media, there is this whole separate disconnected youth culture. And there's always been a youth culture versus an adult culture, but this is like no other time in history where we're not, we would just sit down and watch television shows together. So we would see the commercials together that were on. We would be listening to the same music on the radio, right? Or on CDs or whatever, on vinyl together, and consuming the same media. And that's not what it's looking like now. They're getting on their phone, or they're going in their room, and they're watching totally different things than we are and consuming them. So we can't help them disassemble them live if we're not sharing that with each other. And even the advertising, know that all of those advertising that targeted them did it through their social media, the stuff they were plugging into that we weren't even seeing, we weren't even catching, so we didn't save them from it. And the result of this is that there's sort of an eroding of the parent-child relationships, and even adult-child. We see it in schools as teachers and students that we're really going to need to work to counteract. So the impact of all this is that youth is getting younger and younger. And this is of all the things, of substances and of porn, eating disorders, video games, all of that is starting earlier. And we know that the earlier use equals a higher likelihood of a problem, and the worse impairments tend to be. Specifically with substances, youth addiction and overdoses are increasing. And anxiety and depression are up 30% in the past 10 years with under 18s. And suicide has gone up 60% in the last 10 years. And they're relating a lot of it to a lot of the things that I talked about in terms of the fact that they're hyper-connected and they're overstimulated and they're under-equipped to cope with discomfort. So as I was just mentioning, is that this is, again, I can go off on this forever, but the quick version is that what we're seeing in some preliminary early research is that the way that kids are plugging in, this is our digital generation, right? Our iGen, kids are becoming less able to delay gratification and to be patient, to tolerate distress and uncomfortable feelings, to persist when something gets uncomfortable, and to problem solve. You know, because when you can just go like, oh, what's the answer to that? We all do it, right? I mean, we just look up a piece of information and get it in a second, right? We used to have to go to the library and research. So all of that together, if you look at that list, that is the recipe for addiction. So what is happening is culturally, we are shaping potentially the most addictive generation that we have ever had. And you're like, where's the good stuff? This is still scary stuff. It's coming. So we got to do a quick brain lesson in order to make the rest of everything make sense. So the phrase at-risk youth gets under my skin because they are all at risk, some more than others, but all of them just because of what's happening in their brain. So their brains are wired for addiction like no other time during adolescence. And by that, I mean about age 10 through early to mid 20s when the brain is done growing. Front part of the brain grows last. The brain grows from the bottom to the top, back to the front. We call this the executive center. It's like the CEO for all of the other complex functions happening in the brain. And in that part of the brain that is not done growing till mid-20s is big picture thinking. So the ability to think, what could happen if I make this choice? Or which choice should I make? Is this choice in line with my goals and in line with my values? And how could it impact other people? The ability when feelings get big to stop, think, and control impulses or manage feelings. All of that and prioritizing time and stuff happens in this front part of the brain. So crucial things for life success and thriving. So then, because it's not grown yet, they actually have hyper-rational thinking. And I know that sounds nuts because you're like, how could you have done that? It's so irrational. But actually, they tend to, and I call this Russian roulette thinking, weigh the likelihood that a consequence will happen over the weight of that consequence. So they know that they'll get in trouble by you or get in trouble by school if they get caught vaping, right? But if they're in the basement with their friends and somebody pulls something out, and these are people they really like and they want to have fun and they want to belong with, in that moment, the chances are, especially if they're like, hey, this doesn't smell like anything, and your parents are across the street, they'll never know. They're going to look at what's the chances that it's going to be fun and it's going to bring them some things that they want are greater than the chances that they're going to get caught and that whole crap storm is going to happen, even though it might be a super big crap storm. And then there's dopamine. So dopamine is the stuff in the brain that we hear connected to addiction the most and pleasure. So dopamine pops off when we have thrilling, novel, new, exciting, pleasurable experiences. And it tells our brain to do that thing again. Yes, like it, repeat that, please. So there actually is a dip in dopamine during adolescence. So they are legitimately thrill seeking. So that means we need to help them have some risk managed methods of getting that thrill, right? So there's a dip in that dopamine, they're craving some thrill, and then when it does pop off, when they do something that feels good and that works and they like it, then it goes off extra, extra good. The feels feel extra good. And then there is the magic of what fires wires. So all of the things that they learn from now through early 20s is going to wire together like no other time. They cannot learn as well after that time. It's called neuroplasticity. And so that means that whatever they engage their mind in, what they're thinking about, what they're focusing on, putting their attention in their body towards, if it fires a connection in their brain, it's going to hardwire it into adulthood. And it's hard to unwire it later. Can be done, but it's hard. They do it again, and it like paves the pathway of that neural connection. And then they've got this perfect storm of like we call it the animal brain, the limbic system. If this hand is the model of the brain, then their animal instinct brain, the one that goes off like an alert, an alarm when they feel threatened in any way. And that means socially or emotionally or physically. And this part of their brain extra reacts. It's like a kind of a broken overreactive alarm. And so when they feel threatened, which they actually over-perceive a lot of things as threat, if you haven't noticed that, they can misperceive expressions and tones of voice. That's research proven. So their animal brains overreact. Their stress hormones are actually overreacting. And then they have that whole sex hormone explosion. That's the roller coaster of that, right? You put all of that together and they just have emotional overwhelm. So you get the equation, right? This is like a math equation. So they are emotionally overwhelmed a lot of the time during adolescence, especially those early teen years, do not want to be uncomfortable. And they're not thinking big picture about what they should do to soothe that for themselves or to feel better. And so they make a choice based on that limited thinking. If it feels good and works, it goes cha-chonk and hardwires together into adulthood. So the bad news of that, again, is that they are hardwired for addiction. So the choices that they make really, really matter. But the good news is they're not up to speed yet with what the kids are exposed to. But this is only so important. It doesn't matter how much you know and how much information you give them. If you don't know how to communicate it in a way that they're going to listen to and that they're going to trust you to have those conversations on. So let's get to the rest of this. So delaying use, because we know that the younger somebody uses, the more likelihood of problem, because we now understand how the brain is hardwiring, we want to delay their experimenting, delay their getting into this as long as possible, especially if we have those higher risk kids, and I'll mention who those are. And then resistance skills. So if we're going to tell them, these things are scary, they're dangerous, don't do them, we have to tell them how not to do them. It's not that easy. So just say no. The Just Say No campaign, by the way, backfired, and it was one of the highest levels of use we've ever seen in our youth. Right after that period of time. DARE program also backfired. It ended up in kids using more when they left elementary school than the kids who didn't go through DARE. And the reason for that is because it wasn't realistic. It wasn't based in reality, and it also wasn't based in their reality of trying to keep their cool points on and wanting to belong and wanting to have these shared memories with their friends. So how do they say no to that? So we need to be able to talk with them and problem solve with them and make sure that they have this whole toolbox full of things to say and things to do to get through all of those potential moments. So this is huge. So one of the things they've found is that people that are involved in faith-based groups actually tend to use a lot less. And it has to do with this. Because the clearer that kids are on what they want for themselves and who they believe in being, and that is in the front of their brain, the more likely they are to sift every decision they make through those values and beliefs, through those plans and goals for themselves. And so whether it is who to make friends with, who to date, whether to start being sexual or what substances they put in their body, they're going to sift it through that value system if they've been encouraged to think about it and clarify it. And that conversation has to happen regularly because it's constantly change. And then again, if we're going to say don't use, we then need to help them figure out what to do instead, because they have these needs to belong and feel good about themselves and have fun and to cope with all of the stress and distress and all those overactive feelings. And so we need to help them fill those needs in healthy ways and fill that toolbox in healthy ways if we're going to expect them to not use these really quick short-term illusions that accomplish that for them. But we could do all of this stuff, right? We can say all the things to them, have all the conversations. But again, if there's not attachment and there's not connection between us and our kids, we don't already have a trusting bond, then it's not really going to stick that much. So that's a whole other topic, right? So just know that if you feel like you're falling short and you're trying to do all this stuff, that this is a tough question to ask yourself, that you might come back to, is there something that I need to strengthen in my relationship with my kid so that I'm going to be a better guide and a more trusted source of support and guidance through this. So let's break these down a little bit. Science-based information piece, like I said, is that we, during the 80s, during the 90s, were really scare tactic heavy. And what they found is that would get through a certain period of time, but as soon as a kid tried something or their friend did and they didn't drop dead and it didn't seem like their brains fried immediately, it just looked like it was fun or it felt good, then they just sort of threw it all out, everything that the adults had told them about everything, because they assumed it was all crap then, right? So we've got to be realistic. Yes, absolutely seize that story of the latest celebrity or musician that overdosed, or we've got plenty of them to choose from in the last few years. Even better, somebody that looks like them and that is like the people around them. You know, the kids that tried a drug one time and their Oxycontin that they only had one of was made in somebody's basement and had fentanyl in it. That's stuff that's happening to kids like them. And so if you can find those stories and the local kid that got in the drunk driving accident, etc., use them, but it can't be the only tool that you have in your toolbox. It can be a helpful tool for you to use your family's history of addiction, if you've got one, to be transparent about that. This was one of Kai's main resistance phrases that he used, was to say, oh no, I got the double genes, dude. I'm not going there. And people would leave him alone. He had an internal fear of what could happen to him because he had heard my stories about what addiction did to me. He didn't have a father in his life because of what addiction had done to him. And so that was very personal to him and something that he really did root down in when those tough choices happened. So again, delaying use as long as possible is one of our main points. And so here's one of those like tough love things I got to get in your face about. You've got to check your own role modeling and others' role modeling that are key to your kids, whether it is older siblings or cousins or other people, that adults that are around them. Think about what are the messages that your kid is getting about alcohol, tobacco, caffeine, phone use, prescription meds, right? Or over-the-counter meds. Like, what are the messages that they are getting from you and from your family? So do you have alcohol at every single social function or every party that you host in the house? What message are they getting from that? Is that presented as something that in order to have a good time, in order to bond with each other, that is something that we do? So is it normalized that in order for you to wake up, focus, be nice, that you need a cup of coffee? You may laugh about that because we've normalized that pretty intense addiction of caffeine, but what is that wiring for your kid? And it doesn't matter what we say, right? We know this, but research backs this up. We can say, don't do this like me all day long. But again, we're positioning ourselves to be the models for them all the time. We can't just say, be like me this way, but not this way. That's very, very confusing. And whatever they're watching, they are wiring together. So got to also be real about this thing, is that one of the questions I get a lot is about how they socially host. And that means that they are hosting parties or drinking in their house, you know, with their mid to late teenagers, with the well-intended belief that it's going to keep everybody safe, right? If they're doing it under my own roof, that I can manage it, then I can take care of everybody, then here's the problem with that. You are putting yourself in so much legal risk. I have a huge stack of stories. If something happens to a kid under your roof, or they leave and they hurt themselves, somebody else, or damage property, it's because of the alcohol they drank at your house or another drug that they did in your house, then you are in huge legal trouble. I mean, there can be a stack of charges that go along with that, depending upon the circumstances, as well as civil suits. And Child Protective Services can get involved in that. We had an area case where a 19-year-old had died at a party that a parent was letting happen at her house. And it was tragic because this single mom of two got an 18-month prison sentence because that kid died under her roof. And what the research says, so what has been proven is that kids that are allowed to party and to drink heavily or more than like a couple sips at a time, sanctioned by the parent, they are more likely to drink heavily and drink problematically into adulthood, period. That's what the research says. Now, it is totally different if there is reverence or ritual around somebody saying, well, you can have a couple sips of champagne on New Year's, or this goes with our religion or our culture. And this is the context that we minimally and responsibly and with reverence sort of drink this. That's been proven to be very different, and it actually models something for the kid. The supervision piece is really important. I know that I've presented it as it's getting harder and harder, but we still want to do everything that we can. That means, of course, we're asking all the questions when they go out the door, right? Who's going to be there? What's going on? Talking to the other parents. We do all those things. After school and vacation hours are the ones that are middle schoolers and high schoolers, tend to get in trouble and get into this stuff the most. They can buy everything from, fake IDs to drugs to, devices to use them with just in the mail, and they can use like grandma's Amazon gift card, for some of that stuff. Know what's in your house that's abusable, from prescription drugs to household chemicals to over-the-counter drugs, and just keep an eye on it and be monitoring that. Do not give your kids their drugs to manage. And then there's all of that online activity. Again, if you plug your kid into a device, understand that you are turning over, co-raising your kid with everything that's out there. So just be aware of that. If you're not ready to do what that entails, then consider how much you want them to plug in, because otherwise it's like dropping them in the middle of New York City with all of those temptations and predators and dangers that there is in the middle of a major city. So you need to be plugged into their apps and know what they have and what they can do. TikTok can seem really, really fun. It also there's increasingly instructions for how to engage in eating disorder behavior. And one of the hot TikTok challenges was, can I engage in a school Zoom while I'm getting high at the same time? And so that stuff is on there too. If your kid has an app and you don't know what it is and what the risks of it are and how you might need to manage that or check in, then you need to do your research. And of course, we talked about doing the best you can with media. Bark is a great program to use. This seems obvious, but there's a huge difference for the kids who say that their parents have clearly expressed their expectations and disapproval of use and consequences for use. When I do workshops with parents and kids together, I always ask this question: hey parents, how many of you have laid this out? How many of you think your kids are really clear on this? And then ask the kids, and it is about a third of the kids raise their hand compared to 100% of the parents. So keep in mind, how are they taking it in? You not being explicit to them is absorbed as permission. And I hear it all the time. They think their parents are just chill, they're cool, they don't mind if they do this or that, because if you have not explicitly said it and had the conversation, that's how they absorb it. So those kids, again, they've been proven to use less when a parent says, not I'm going to kick you out of the house when you suck if you use, but just this is our norm in the family. Like, this is not going to be okay. And I'm going to keep getting involved. I'm going to intervene if you are. So kids think that we lay down these rules and these guidelines because we just want to be a total buzzkill and ruin their lives, right? When in fact, it's because they're the greatest loves of our life, and we would take or send a bullet on their behalf without even thinking, right? So we tell them that we're giving them these guidelines, we're giving them these consequences when they don't follow them, because these substances are harmful and dangerous, right? And we can give them all that information or research it with them because they're illegal. And we know that kids that get in legal trouble can have a digital tattoo and can have a scarring that lasts into adulthood, even if they're records are expunged. And we can't say enough that we love them more than anything on earth, right? As well as the fact that you can get in trouble too. If you know your kid's engaging in substance use and you don't aggressively intervene in that, then people like me have to call DSS. So this is the meat right here, is the communication skills, is how to have these conversations that matter, and at every age. So for one, they can't be like the talk, right? Any more than the sex talk can be a 1 hour thing, because for one, your kid will dread it. They will already be prepared to tune it out. They'll do anything they can to avoid it. So it needs to be organically woven in. It's better to have 61-minute conversations, right, than that one big talk. And that every age piece. So this is where you all who are parents of the little kids, who I talked into being here, who didn't think it was relevant for you, this is where you start listening, because you are starting when they are young to really set the stage with conversations and with trust and with open communication norms that are going to make all of the difference by the time they hit adolescence and it gets more complicated and the risks get more dangerous and the world is chipping away at them pretty intensely, that foundation has already been laid. It can't start in 7th grade. So let's talk about how to do that. So with the little ones, starting young, parents will ask me like, so when do I start having this conversation with my kids? And I'm like, I bet you have already. So anytime that you talk to your kids about what they put in their bodies and how they treat them. So whether it is food or medicine or chemicals around the house or vitamins, right? If they pop 4 gummy vitamins in their mouth, then you stop, you don't just laugh it off. You stop and have a conversation about how that can actually be unhealthy for them to have too many vitamins, because that is a thing. So anytime those conversations are had, you're setting the stage. Remember that whatever they are seeing, you need to help them make healthy sense of. So they're watching people drink alcohol or using phones or vaping or smoking nicotine, and you're not helping them make sense of that. They're making their own. They're wiring their own values and beliefs and decisions about that based on what they're seeing. So you've got to help them make sense of that. You can talk about addiction at young ages. So they've added a Sesame Street character with an addicted parent. As sad as that is, because of the rate of addiction and the rate of overdoses, you can talk about addiction with them as a brain condition. You know, might be middle elementary conversation, but to say, like, so I explained to my kid when he was 5 years old and Nana was smoking, and he didn't understand how somebody so awesome as Nana that he looked up who could be doing this thing that he categorized as so horrible and awful. And so I explained it like it was a spell, right? Like cigarettes have something in there. It's kind of magic, and it puts a spell over the people that use it, and it's really hard to break that spell. I mean, granted, that was 3, 4-year-old, 5-year-old language, but they can understand that an addiction to something makes whatever that thing is or that activity is more important than anything in somebody's life, and it changes how people treat other people and how they act. So anytime you talk about boundaries and consent, like respecting other people's, but also establishing their own and standing strong in them, then you are helping them get ready for what will be conversations about sex and drugs and porn, as well as helping them to recognize like that uh-oh feeling in their gut. You know, when is that feeling when they're off, right? When something feels like it's kind of going against what they're comfortable with and they feel okay with. Having them honor that is going to last them forever, right? I still use that gut feeling at almost 50. So talking to them about real friends. I have this conversation with my college students still, and we built on the one we had when he was in kindergarten, so that real friends encourage you to be healthy and to follow those rules, right? Or to not get in trouble or to not hurt themselves. They encourage you to be responsible. They don't pressure you to do things you don't want to do. And again, anytime you're teaching like assertiveness and self-advocacy, you are getting them ready for when they're really going to need to say no in tough situations. And even if your kids don't respond, and this is at every age, even if your kids, they laugh it off, they look freaked out, they blow it off, the fact that you are bringing it up, letting them know that it's not taboo, that you are there to have that conversation, they have permission to think about it and to ask you about it. So here is the almighty equation that sounds simple, but this is going to save your lives with your teenager, your sanity. So the simple equation is communication equals trust equals freedom. I'll hear a lot of people will say, well, yeah, that's great. I get I should be talking to my kid, but he just won't listen. He blows me off and doesn't want to have the conversation. So here's what you throw down as the norm. Okay, so listen, believe it or not, we've got the same goals. We want for you to have freedom. And I have hesitated to say this, but I want you to have freedom so badly, because when you have freedom, I have freedom, right? So we both want the same thing, for you to be able to spread your wings and have more freedom to do your thing. But in order for me to let you go further and further away and ask less and less questions, I'm going to need to trust the decisions that you're making. And that means no matter who's there and what goes down, because we have less and less control over that. As soon as cars come in the mix, that is all over, right? They can be anywhere doing anything, no matter how many questions we've asked and no matter where they say they are. And a lot of us know that because we did that, right? And just snaking around. So we need to trust that if things go south, if they're in danger, if somebody else is in danger, that no matter what happens, they are going to make some healthy decisions for themselves. So in order for us to trust their decision making so that we can give them that freedom, we have to have communication, because we have to know where their head's at in terms of all of this stuff. We need to know where their value system is at. What do they think of overdoses? What do they know about these topics? What would they do if their driver was under the influence? What would they do if they got the uh-oh feeling, right? If something was going wrong, they thought they were about to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or if somebody tries to get in their car that they are driving and they got substances on them. And that's the kinds of stuff that we have to trust when they go out the door. Or if that kid, you know the one, shows up. So in order to do that, they have to be willing to engage in these conversations with you. They have to tell you what's going on in their world. You have to know what kind of decisions they're having to make, what they're exposed to, and what kind of choices they're navigating through on a daily basis. Now, when I lay this down with families, kids get freaked out because they get afraid of their parents' reaction. But hold on to that for a minute. So we're gonna ask all those open-ended questions, and how or what are the really valuable ones, right? Why doesn't go too far with undeveloped brains, but we want to know how they feel, how that left them feeling, or what they were thinking, what happened for them. I mean, all those kind of questions tend to give better answers than, was it a good party? Were there drugs there? Did this happen? Did that happen? Right? It's easier to shut that down. So give them some hows and whats. And when you ask those questions, then you have to listen. You got to listen. If you are talking more than 50% of the time, then you are lecturing. And that only comes from a great place. Trust me, as an educator and a counselor, I was the absolute worst. My kid was the one that taught me this. And all of my middle schooler kids I talk to all the time, who are so frustrated that their parents think they're having conversations with them, when they will just say like, oh my God, my mom gave me the biggest TEDx about not doing drugs this weekend. When the mom had just left my office saying, oh my God, I had the best conversation with my kid. And that's not how I came across. So if you're really going to know who they are and what they're coping with and what their world entails, you need to know what their world entails. If you're going to help them steer through them, then you've got to shut up and listen to them. And so here we come back to what these kids get freaked out about. They're like, I can't tell them that I get offered drugs 3 times a day. I can't tell them that my friends are using, that this is around me, because they're going to freak out. And understand that all it takes is one good freak out for them to rule you out as a trusted source of support on this. And to feel like, oh, never mind, she can't handle that. Not the place to go. I'll just Google it or ask my other 16-year-old friend. So you listening and you validating doesn't mean that you are agreeing with them, right? But if you can just respect their viewpoint, and you can say like, okay, I hear that. I get why you would think that way. I get why you would feel that way. I actually think something different because of this research that I saw, right? Or I have a very different opinion on that. Just and it. Don't give the big old but, and it. That means that you can hold theirs and then also stay solid in yours. And they may really respect your viewpoint if you have respected theirs, instead of being like, that's crazy, that's nuts. Don't you know that can rot your brain? Or how can you think that's the stupidest idea? And remember, they are testing you. If you haven't noticed this, if you have a 12-plus-year-old, is what they start to do is say these things that are provocative. Say these things that they know that you will be reactive to or that are against your values, not because they believe them, because they're testing you out. They're testing you out to see if you are going to let them develop into their own person or if you are just going to expect them to be another version of you. So acknowledge theirs and then express yours. And if they're going to be sharing their world with you and saying like, yeah, I do have friends that are doing Molly or watching porn, that you are not then going to go FBI on them. You're going to say, who is it? I'm calling their mama. Again, you're going to lose them. They're not going to turn over on their friends, right? They're not going to be the narcs. Your kid is your focus here, the health and well-being and thriving and success of your child. So you're not going to say who did it and where. You also have conversations about when somebody's in trouble and what role you can help play in that, or when they need to get an adult involved. So you have those conversations. But otherwise, you're taking those situations and using them to say, well, what do you think and feel about that? Or what did you do with that? Or how do you handle yourself? Or what do you think you can do next time? So weaving in little conversations where you can. So that means seizing everyday teachable moments. And unfortunately or fortunately, they are everywhere. So again, whether it's the celebrity going to rehab or the latest overdose, or it is those music references, or it's the Super Bowl ads or bulletin boards, that there are teachable moments everywhere. But help them to disassemble the media, because again, advertising companies are hiring psychologists to get into kids' brains and create future young customers. So use their value of hating to be manipulated, right? Nothing that teenagers hate more than being conned and manipulated and taken for a ride, right? And controlled. So go in on that. And if you can help them see the billions of dollars that are being spent, the psychologists that are being hired, just so that they can give this distorted, unrealistic versions of things and target them to get their money, that pisses them off enough that they actually turn on it. And then it's really important that we speak to their values. So we have this habit of speaking through our own, right? Like, so that's going to ruin your career and your marriages and your, like college stuff. And that may absolutely not be where their head is at, likely, especially when they're, in middle school. So I've had parents that tried to tell their kids that marijuana cuts your sperm count as like a deterrent. And they're like, well, sweet. And it's like birth control too. All of that question asking that you've done and all of those conversations that you've had where you've listened and you know what matters to your kid, this is when you use it to be able to speak through it. So what matters to them? Is it modeling to their younger sibling? Is it their academics in their brain? Is it their athleticism? Is it their vanity and just them keeping their like skin looking good? So again, we talked about how you have to be accurate. You cannot be scare-based because they can Google it 10 times faster than we can. And once they discount us, we have lost them, right? They are no longer going to go to us as a source of information. So it's okay to give those honest answers. For one, that means that there's a lot of hypocrisies and complexity out there in terms of this stuff. Yes, marijuana, cannabis, is being prescribed to people with bipolar disorder and anxiety medicinally, adults with fully formed brains and bodies. So we're not going to discount that and say, oh, it's an evil substance, but we are going to acknowledge that and then say, and it's totally different for you with an adolescent brain and body. It disrupts the growth of your brain and can actually cause mental illness and worsen it. Yes, vaping is helping people that have been smoking and were killing themselves with potential lung cancer. As far as we know, it's helping them get off of cigarettes and maybe lengthening their life, maybe better for them. And here's all these things that are really dangerous and awful about nicotine, particularly adolescent use. And so risk management or harm reduction with older kids is if we're going to put all our eggs in the basket of our intention is going to be, my kid is going to be clean and sober. They're never going to touch a substance all the way through high school. And that's what you're going to put all your effort towards. Then you're going to miss all of these opportunities to give them really realistic information that they're going to need in realistic situations. So being able to have those honest conversations of recognizing that most kids are going to go there by the time they're done with high school with something. So how can you make sure they know that here's what you do, right? If somebody has had too much, here's what too much is. And then, like we talked about with peer pressure briefly before, you need to help them strategize those tough situations. So what do you do when somebody offers something to you that you don't want to use? How do you say no and still keep your cool on and still feel like you're part of the party? How do you handle it if your bride is drunk or if you think somebody has overdosed? So it's really important that, again, if you're going to trust them to walk out the door, that you know that they know how to handle those situations. And you can brainstorm. My kid and I made this funny. We came up with all these hilarious, ridiculous ones. And then sort of like he settled on a few of them that actually tried them out and they worked. So his favorite was like, my mom's like a drug dog. She can like see my pupils from across the room. I can't. That was one we came up with. I was proud of that. So I get this question a lot about like, should I tell my kids about my own experience that I used or that I had a problem? And it all really depends on how. It can be a really rich and valuable thing because again, for them to have it close to home is way more powerful than it being a news story out here. And this is something I did a lot with my kid that was really powerful for us. But you have to keep in mind that a kid will take in something really easily as, wow, that sounds like an adventure. That sounds like it's just sort of a rite of passage that everybody's supposed to have, right? Or that really gave you some great stories to tell together. And I've heard parents think that they were giving these deterrent stories. You know, they're sitting and talking to their friend with their kid there about how they were, you know, drunk in college and brought him to the hospital and he had his stomach pumped. And the parent thought that that was a deterrent. And the kid took that in as like, oh, I guess that's just what you do. Like everybody's got to have those stories. And that's a dangerous story to think is normalized. So be sure that you're not romanticizing it, you know, that you're not making it sound super fun. And I encourage you to talk about how we know now things that we didn't know then. And boy, what if you had known that? How sad is that? That these friends that you had all during childhood, that all of a sudden when you hit 8th grade or you hit high school, you thought in order to have fun, you had to drink together or smoke weed together. That's so sad because you used to have so much fun together. So what if you knew that you didn't have to do all those things, you know, to be cool, like how you would play that out differently now. And then this is really, really important. You don't realize how in any high school in America, your kids, any middle school, your kids have the option to use. Somebody is always watching porn and they are choosing not to all the time. Even the kids that go there that you bust, they have, I guarantee, made 1,000 decisions not to do it. So it's really important that you recognize that they are making those healthy decisions, that the vast majority of the time they're being responsible and healthy. This is the elevator speech right here. So when I get asked like, so what do I do to keep my kids off drugs? I've got, 3 minutes. This is the short version. They've got these 6 basic needs. It's for fun and excitement and thrilling experiences like we talked about. This is a dopamine brain-based thing. So we need to be able to give them ways to overcome like scary challenges and conquer their fear in ways that are healthy, that aren't like life endangering. They all want belonging more than any other time in their life. So pre-COVID, I would have said that all I wanted was to like hang out in the freaking mountains with my cats. And that's all I wanted. Whereas in middle school, I couldn't be around people enough. And then they want to feel grown, right? They want to feel like they have some agency and some control over their lives, and they're going to find it somehow. So how can we help them? Whether it's even like they're making their own lunch, they're responsible for some things in their own life. They have some leadership role in the family or somewhere else where they can feel grown without feeling like they've got to do grown-up things. They all want to know who they are and like that person, right? They're all on the journey of figuring that out. And if something gives them the fast track to that, it's going to be appealing. So they need to be guided towards developing that in healthy ways. And then mastery and competence, a branch off competence, is every kid wants to feel like they're good at something, right? That they've got something mastered. For me, I was really good at drinking. For real, I could do it upside down. I could do it standing on my hands. I could drink 5 at a time. You could put it on fire. And that was like my bragging point, that I could drink every big dude under the table because I didn't feel like I had a whole lot else yet going on for me, sadly. And then peace and security, which really means, other than just having basic needs met, that they have ways to cope with their stress and cope with their discomfort. The bottom line is that kids are going to find some way to get these met, and they are going to choose what is convenient and what works. So for me, who grew up in a bar and a restaurant, when I felt my angsty teen stuff and had all these intense feels, I had food and I had booze, and they really, worked immediately better than anything else I had going on in my life, unfortunately. And so those became my two main addictions. One of our main preventative tasks for our kids is to help them have each of these buckets really full of options that they can access easily and that are meaningful, that work for them. So that if they do pick up that hit of weed or the drink, that they go, okay, so that's an option. I know that that's there, but I don't need it because I've got 100 other things, these other couple other things that really do that for me too, that don't damage my brain growth. So the short version is that, this is simple but not easy, is that some of us have higher risk kids, right? And those higher risk kids are the ones that have had trauma, that have prolonged stress, that have challenges with making friends and keeping friends and social skills, that have extra feels, extra anger and depression and anxiety, or they're really sensitive, which can be a beautiful thing, but it can also be tough to feel overwhelmed all the time, says that person. And learning challenges and giftedness are both risk factors for our kids of developing this stuff. And impulsivity and compulsivity is huge. That's one of the biggest markers. They can actually watch a kid in kindergarten who has more compulsive traits and impulsive traits, and they're more likely to develop addictive stuff later. So if our kids are higher risk, then we know that that needs extra attention. And so we find the ways, right? We get the help. So school counselors are a great resource for moving you towards whether you need more intensive therapy, or there are community programs. There's all these great things from Big Brothers and Big Sisters to outdoor programs to, depending upon your community. Just don't be afraid to ask for help because it's a lot to take on. So get some partners and some allies in that. So last piece, what do you do if you discover your kid is using? We're going to use some of our skills from when I talked about the communication piece, but know that when your kid is under the influence and when you are really upset is not the time, right? It's not going to work for anybody. So timing can be really key, and saying it's not an option that we are going to talk about this, but there's some choice in when we talk about this. I love you so much, and I'm so scared and worried about you with this choice that I need to get clear on what I want to say and how before we have this conversation. It's okay for you to say that. And then to also say, we're not going to talk about this now because I can see you're so upset or you're under the influence, but we are going to talk about it tomorrow. And it's okay along the way when you're having the conversation to also take time outs. Be like, you know what? I love you so much. This is getting me worked up. I'm going to just check out for a minute and let's come back to this. But you mean enough to me that we're going to keep on talking about it. So get clear on your motives. You got to root down and take that deep breath in and remember that underneath what may be coming across, like your instant surface reaction is anger or disappointment, maybe even embarrassment. Other people know this is your kid. What are they going to think? Right? There can be all of those sort of kind of ego-based things that is more about us and about them. So remember that, what is this about? What are you most afraid of here? Why do you care about this? And you're going to root down in, because I love the heck out of this kid, because she's the love of my life, right? So get clear on that motive and breathe into it and stay there if you need to when those other feelings, start to escalate. And again, we need to ask questions and we need to listen. So here's what we need to know. We need to know why they used. Like, what was going on both outside of them? What was the pressure? What did that look like? What did that sound like? And what was going on inside of them? So what was their urge? What was their thought process? What were they feeling and what were they thinking? And once you understand that, then you know where to intervene, right? Because you want to be able to get to those needs that we talked about. What of their needs were they trying to meet there, so that we then know, oh, okay, this is where my kid's got a deficit. This is where I need to help my kid beef up this area so that this isn't as tempting, or that it definitely doesn't stick. Again, our temptation, which is, it's all love underneath, but we can say the harshest stuff when we are afraid, right? Oh my God, that was so stupid, or I can't believe you do that, or you're smarter than this. All those things that want to fly out our faces when our kid makes this choice, or how could you do this to me? I'm the PTA president. What are they going to think? It's important that we stay in the facts. Instead of, I can't believe you lied to me about all this. You're, what a liar you are. Giving the facts about, this is what I saw. This is what I heard. This is what people told me happened, without making it a personal thing and making it a judgment call. Because of course, they will just get reactive. You won't be having a conversation. So you put out the parts that they can't argue with. This is crucial, and this is a counseling strategy that you're just using as a parent. Again, if you know their values and you know their goals, you don't have to tell them and why this is a bad idea and how horrible it's going to be for them. You just say, okay, well, this is what you say you want. this is what you say you believe in. How does this thing that you did, how does this fit in with this value you have, with who you want to be, with this thing that you want for yourself? And let them be able to come to that discrepancy and that incongruence themselves. And that's when you then seize that moment to be like, well, okay, let me help you get it in line. Let me help you get what you need. And so designing consequences, there's that punishment-based piece where, again, we want them to just not do it again because we're afraid, because we love them, right? And so we want to make it sting. We want to take away the thing that means the most to them, which is usually their phone. That's like the go-to default, because every parent's like, I'm taking your phone for a month for no matter what happens, because you watched porn on some other device, because you smoked pot, which had nothing to do with your phone. So think about constructive educational consequences. So again, if we know why they did it and what was going on for them, then our consequence is more of an intervention. So there might be some natural consequences. Keep in mind, if your kid drank so much that they threw up for 3 days, right, or they humiliated the hell out of themselves, you might not need to rub that in too much, right? There's some real natural consequence there. Otherwise, keep it as related as possible. If they planned a drug deal on Snapchat, then it makes sense for you to take their phone. Otherwise, we want to relate it to what they did, and we want to help them get the information that they're telling us they're missing. We want to help them get the needs met that they're showing us they need help with. And that's what our intervention is. So maybe the consequence is, I'm going to connect you with a therapist. And I know you're kind of resistant about this, but this is what's going to go on, because I love you, and we need to find another way for you to handle your anxiety than smoking weed or vaping nicotine. Or we're going to go jogging every day, you and me together. Or you need to do some apologies, to these people because you ran over their mailbox. We're going to do some research. And again, you are expressing your dedication. I am dedicated to helping you get what you need here so that you don't ever need a substance, so that you don't ever dive into something that you can hurt yourself with. So if that means seeking counseling, if that means seeking other interventions, that you just put that out there again as an act of love. And then they need help, discussing those realistic strategies. So coming back to that peer pressure piece. And get help with that conversation if you need, whether it's your school counselor, or sometimes it just needs to be somebody else in the family, or an older but still young enough to be cool family friend or something that they might listen to better than us. As a single mom, I was also the disciplinarian all the time, so I needed help with this sometimes. And then you again express your unwavering dedication. So that means like, we're gonna put this in place and hope that you don't keep going there, or don't keep going there in these dangerous ways. And if you do, know that I love you enough that I am going to keep getting involved in this to help you make better decisions, right? I have this unwavering dedication. So it's not, again, you controlling them and you being super strict. They may take it in that way. But what I hear behind the scenes, that when a parent isn't strict and in terms of responsive and show that they care their kid is doing this stuff, the kid also takes that in as, wow, that's really messed up. Like, my parent doesn't care enough about me. That is the end. So here's what I want to make sure you have. My website is packed with parent resources. I've got my substance abuse section and my brain section have everything from books to videos to, I have combed through the internet for the best of the best so that you don't have to spend days doing that. And then the one-stop place that I love to go is the Partnership for Drug-Free Kids. They've got everything from how to have conversations starting in preschool through college with your kids that are actually not dorky suggestions. I've got a big dork radar. They talk about the drug intel. They talk about support for you if you catch your kid, and if you're worried that your kid has a problem, and where you find rehab and help, like everything in the whole spectrum of use. My social media is increasingly kicking. I encourage you to plug into that. I've got Twitter, Instagram videos weekly, and a professional Facebook. So look for my professional name with my letters after it. And I've got a brand new YouTube channel called Raising Teens in Reality, and that's going to be kicking. All right, well, you know where to find me. So thank you all for your time. It was really fun. Thanks, everybody. Meg, you got to sign off?
I just want to thank you again for coming and being with Kriya tonight. As I said earlier, she has a lot to share and really cool approach with kids.
Hang out for a minute. I forgot.
Terrific information. We appreciate her being here tonight. And then the last thing is just to let you know that we are working with the Buncombe County Schools and also at Owen to continue the work in terms of providing information for families around drug prevention. If you are an Owen District family member here tonight, and you're interested in continuing to help us, we have a little committee here. We're working on trying to figuring out what we're going to do next with our students and our school community. So reach out to me. Let me know if you'd like to continue to be involved. And again, we thank you very much. I'm finished. Kriya's back with one more thing.